So I'm Matthew Gaskell. I'm a consultant psychologist and a clinical lead for addictions with the Leeds and York Partnership NHS Foundation Trust, and I have a role as the clinical lead for the new NHS Northern Gambling Service. So in terms of prognosis for success, if you have an addiction problem, there's really good news. The success rates, if that's the term we want to use, are really good. There's lots of great population studies showing that addiction problems can be relatively short-lived and people can come out of them and do well. We need to do a little bit better in this country in following people through and doing what we call longitudinal research so that we can really see in gambling those, the longevity of success rates. But we see very marked changes from when somebody comes through the door to when we discharge them. And in our northern NHS clinics, we're very keen to follow those people up over the long term as well. But I think the important message is that the prognosis for recovery from addiction is extremely good. It's right up there with all of the other mental health disorders. It's got one of the best prognostic rates, best rates for successful outcome. And sometimes that's missed in the public discourse. I think there's this narrative, once an addict, always an addict. And that reflects more, sometimes people with addictions like to see themselves in that way because it keeps them vigilant, it keeps them focusing day by day on remaining in recovery. But actually the success rates are very good. Yes, some people come in and out of addiction, and that's got to be recognised, and we've got to help people see that not as any form of personal sort of failure, but sometimes for some part of the process. But again, once you can get them back into support, again they can get onto good stable recovery as well. The other thing probably to mention too is that treatment isn't always necessary. So the majority of people actually move through addictions without support. I mean, I think it's really important that people know that there's support out there for gambling addiction, and it's there for people, and it's really necessary for a lot of people. Of course, there's not just support in the NHS, there's support with what's called mutual aid, with Gamblers Anonymous. There are other providers of gambling support along that continuum of harm as well. There's a much better offer for people who've got gambling problems. But actually the reality is that the majority of people who have addictions come out of them through what we call natural recovery. And that usually happens as a result of things that are going on in the person's life that get them to stop and reflect on their behaviour. Maybe there's some incentives around employment or relationships or other things that are happening environmentally that help them move out of addiction, which again goes back to this idea that it isn't people who've got sort of, brain diseases or it's all about the individual. The environment has such an important role to play in recovery and helping people feel more supported and connected to the world. And when they feel that way, they tend to do pretty well. So we've known in my field for a long time the impact of forming a really good relationship with a service user, having someone who thinks that you're a very credible person, somebody who really listens to them and understands their experience. But I'd really like to emphasise the role that lived experience can have in this space as well, and how inspiring those kind of role models can be. People who are recovering well, people might identify themselves as being recovered or in different places. So first of all, within the active kind of therapy process in groups, for example, we see people at the same stage who are benefiting from going through the process at the same stage together and feeding off each other, being inspired by each other, validated by each other, a sense of belonging and shared experience. But I think what's really important too is having the voice and the involvement of people who are living well and are overcoming and have overcome their problems. So people who are in recovery or who are recovering really well perhaps have more than a year and sometimes a few years of recovery under their belts. And I think their voice must be heard and needs to be heard because they provide such inspiration. A lot of people are much more comfortable speaking to someone with lived experience than they might be, a psychologist or a psychiatrist, for example. Of course, those professions have to have their place, but the lived experience voice is incredibly powerful. We don't use it enough in mental health, in addictions, I think addictions, they're doing pretty well, but certainly we're really keen to use it in our NHS Northern clinics, and allow people to connect with people who were in their shoes, feeling as desperate as they are, feeling as suicidal as they are, feeling that there's no way out of this addiction, it's got a complete hold on them. Those are the kind of things that we hear. They're not eating, they're not putting food on the table, everything around them feels like it's kind of fallen apart and there's no way out. One of the turning points can be talking to people with lived experience. So I'm really keen in our Northern clinics that we involve lived experience from the very beginning, just engaging people to come in. We've got lived experience stories on our websites, people giving their accounts in summary as well. So engaging people to come in the first place, helping them in to tell them a bit about how things might work for them so they feel more comfortable. But also at different points during that journey, if you like, but particularly once the therapy process is finished, I think it's really important that they're surrounded or connected into the lived experience community, so that they can have that ongoing vigilance and feedback and dialogue, perhaps have support groups together. Mutual Aid, Gamblers Anonymous are an example. So I couldn't emphasise more the importance of the lived experience, voice and experience. If you get the right people with the right intentions who've perhaps dealt with their own stuff, they can be such an enormous gift for people who are struggling.